All right, welcome everyone. Welcome back to Conflict and Communication, a holistic approach. We're in week 3. We're so glad that you're still here with us. And hopefully you have had the opportunity to join us in Mighty Networks as well. I know a couple more people popped into that after last week. So thank you for joining us there as well. And why don't you take us away with a little breathing, Colleen?
Okay, everyone, how are you all doing today? Let's just check in with how you're feeling right now. So you can just close your eyes if it's possible, wherever you are, and really move your attention down from this part of the mind down into the center of the chest, the heart area. Good. And in this place, we're just going to take 3 nice, big, deep breaths. Good. Staying down. And just really checking in with how you're feeling today. And just opening yourself to anything that you are ready to see, that you might want to know, that you have questions about. Bringing all of yourself right here. Good. One nice big deep breath. Good. And with that, I will pass it back to Susan.
Thank you, Colleen. So, one of the reasons why we always start with that breathing grounding practice is even though it seems really simple, it's the simple things that are usually the most effective things. And when it comes to communication, when it comes to conflict resolution, a lot of times what starts to happen is we're not grounded, we're not centered, we're not breathing. And so these really simple practices, the more you do them, the more that your body remembers to do them in those times of stress, or even if it's not feeling particularly stressful, but you just know you're about to go into some kind of communication. It's remembering to take that deep breath, remembering to just take a moment and check in with, ooh, I just realized that I was feeling really tense after that phone call, and I'm not going to take that energy into my next conversation or whatever it might be. So it's just a practice in helping us get more self-aware, which is what all of this is about. So this week, as promised, we are talking about the role of unmet needs in communication and conflict. So what does it mean to have an unmet need beyond the obvious of what it sounds like? Well, at the root of almost every communication with another person is some kind of need. And when we communicate, we might be asking something really specifically from another person, like, can you do this or that? Can I get your opinion on this or that? And so we're either stating our need or trying to get a need met in a very explicit way, or I should say, or we have the more implicit needs that we are seeking to meet through a communication. So it might be a more subtle thing like a need for connection. It might be a need for validation, belonging, reassurance, any of those things that we've been talking about. And so all of those needs are important, whether they are those explicit needs that we are expressing or those implicit needs that either we're not, fully expressing or maybe not even being fully conscious of. But it's when those needs are not being met, either our own needs are being met or maybe we are struggling to meet the needs of another person, that's usually when conflict arises. So a really good example of recognizing the role of needs comes from children, whether you have your own children or children in society, because children are very expressive in terms of, are they getting a need met? And many of us were raised to perceive that children just act up for no reason. And in those moments, maybe they even require a scolding or a punishment, a timeout or something like that. But the reality is, as children, and as an extension of that, us as grown-ups, we are never responding to nothing. In other words, something is happening, and either, again, some sort of need isn't being met in that moment. There's a number of other things that might be happening, but a lot of times it is that we're being overstimulated in some way. Maybe we're tired, maybe we're hungry. Yeah, maybe it's loud, maybe there's a lot of tension in the room. So our children, or children just out in the world, are responding to those things in a really visceral way, and oftentimes very visual and obvious way. So the thing is that's happening for the grown-ups as well. That's happening for all of us as adults. It's just not necessarily as explicitly expressed, or it's expressed in a more sideways way sometimes. So a big part of this, of course, whether you have children as a model for this, or you're just experiencing it in yourself, is learning how to recognize those needs, those unmet needs specifically within yourself and also within other people. Now, ideally, other people express their needs to us as well, but that's often not the case. So we do well to practice not only learning what our needs are, but learning how to detect needs in another person, recognizing, of course, that it's never our responsibility to figure out somebody else's needs, or to assume or to project our own feelings on what their needs are. But it can be helpful to at least have that awareness in mind, that it is part of what we're managing in any given moment, because the reality is that we're constantly going to be trying to get those needs met. It's just a matter of if we're going to meet them in really healthy ways, or maybe in less healthy ways. So how do core stories and trauma responses fit into this idea of unmet needs? Because we've obviously been talking about this in the last couple of weeks. And our needs, if it's not obvious by now, our needs are often dictated by those underlying stories that we carry, or those past experiences that we've had that have shaped our brains and our lives in some way. And that's why we've taken the time to explore those with all of you, because the communications we're having and the conflicts we're having, they don't live in a vacuum. They're inspired by something. They're informed by something. And if you don't really understand what's informing those things, you'll probably circle around and cycle around to the same types of conflicts and communication challenges over and over again without really understanding, why am I here again? So those core stories can help us home in on what our needs are, so that at least we have a little bit more consciousness in those moments of expressing what our needs are, which we're going to get to later today. And then when it comes to our trauma responses, which we talked about last week, and by the way, those recordings are in the Mighty Networks if you want to review them, or if you happen to have missed them. It's remembering that the current experience that we're having, whether it's that conversation with our boss or our kids or our partner, whoever it might be, isn't necessarily traumatic in and of itself, though it could be for whatever reason. But it's really that what's happening is we are responding to some kind of past threat that has now been ingrained in our brain and in our body. And so we are either consciously or unconsciously responding from those places where in the past we felt a threat. And that's a very human thing to do. That's nothing to be ashamed of. So if you're arriving at conversations with that strong flight response or fight response or freeze or flop or fawn, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's really, you're just being a human having a trauma response that's wired in your system. But again, like we talked about last week, the more that you can consciously recognize those patterns that you default to, the more you can support yourself around them in certain situations. So just as an example, I can have a tendency to freeze if I'm overwhelmed with information. And the way that that might manifest is if I'm listening to somebody and I'm starting to get overwhelmed, either emotionally or logistically, I will notice that I start to tune out a little bit, which of course is problematic because you're going to miss something, right? And so now that I've become more aware of my tendency to do that, I start to notice quicker when I'm in those more maybe heightened communication situations, like, oh, I'm starting to tune out a little bit. Take a deep breath, or feel your feet on the ground. Okay, Susan, really listen to what that person is saying. And I'm just able to kind of coach myself through that a little bit more because I'm aware in a more conscious way that I'm defaulting into that freeze pattern. So all of these things have a relationship, obviously, with our needs, because again, the more we understand our stories, the more we understand those trauma responses, the clearer we can make those needs in the moment. We're more able to say, you know what, I'm gonna need to take this information in and give you a call back before I make a decision. I'm gonna need to step away from this conversation for a moment, and I'm gonna come back in 10 minutes if that's all right, or whatever it might be appropriate for the situation and the conversation that you're having. All right. So Colleen's going to walk us through a little bit more of identifying our needs.
Okay, so 5 ways to identify our needs. The first is begin with the desired outcome. And what that means is that when you're in a conflict with someone, or even, even a mild conflict, or you know that a big impending conversation is coming up, or something like this, it's really good to start with what's the desired outcome, right? So I'm going to talk to my boss. I think we're going to do a review, but also I have these things that aren't really working in my job. And so it's good to start with, I'm having a lot of feelings about this. Why? What's coming up, and what would you like to get out of the conversation? And the reason why, because when we start with the desired outcome, what's the ideal situation? I would like to be heard. I would like a raise. I would like more support at work. I would like to really have a good review that actually reflects all of my gifts so that I am really seen in my workplace. Things like this. So when we begin with the desired outcome, we start to naturally uncover those needs. What do I really want out of this? And sometimes the needs can be a little bit, in the most loving way to ourselves, like a little bit self-serving, right? Well, I want to be right, or I want to be, I want to be validated because I know I'm right. And it's like, well, okay, but what's the need underneath that? So when you really start to look at the desired outcome, you really start to see, oh wow, the need is actually kind of hidden in there, and I want validation, or I want approval, or I want to feel liked, or I want to feel, all the things. So when you really begin with the desired outcome, you start to draw sort of a line back to what the needs might be. And with that, being honest with yourself and with others about those needs, what those needs are, can really start to move you further down the field in conflict. And sometimes that can be very vulnerable, even to get honest with yourself. Like, I really want my boss's, attention and approval. And you may not feel comfortable saying that to your boss because it might not be appropriate in that work environment. But when you know that, you're going to be able to approach the conversation with a lot more compassion for yourself, understanding of where you're coming from, and you're more likely to get those needs met. Now, if you do feel like you can be really honest and clear with the person, let's say it's a family member or a friend or a partner, it's good to actually say like, I realize that I'm really seeking your validation, I'm seeking your approval, and I will kind of do anything to make that happen. When you diffuse that feeling and that need, a lot of times the charge that's happening in conversations will automatically go away, and you're going to find that you're closer to getting those needs met. So when you just call out what's happening in a really authentic, honest way, at least with yourself, and ideally you can do it with the other person or people, right? You're going to just have a better map towards getting things moving and getting your own needs met, and really then beginning to understand where other people might be coming from. So be with that, being curious with your feelings, right? A lot of times we cannot identify the need right away. It's deep inside of us. So we might start with a tremendous judgment of someone else. Well, if they would just do that thing, or if they were more present, or if they were more kind. So maybe there's a lot of layers in there. But as we get more curious with our feelings, and we start to work our way backwards towards ourselves, it's, I see that I actually kind of feel judged, and I don't feel like I'm being as kind as I should be. And, that's terrible. When you're curious with your own feelings, you start to own your experience, like we've talked about before, in a much clearer way. You start to be like, oh, okay. You can walk back your feelings to what's really going on. And it can take a little excavation, a little time, a little patience, things like that. Mapping and tracking the timeline of events is really good when there's a lot going on in some sort of conflict. So if there is a lot of information, let's say you're dealing with a complicated situation with the family, where you're having conflict with one person, but it involves a larger family story, a larger family picture. A lot of times, even getting as clear as writing things down or drawing a map of like, last Friday, this person said this, and then they called, my parents, and then my parents got involved and started to intercede and tell me these things. When you can actually just look back and start to map and track things, you're going to have a much easier time having clear conversations about that. Like, well, I wasn't feeling bad about it on Friday, but then by Monday, after I knew that you two had gotten involved, then I felt like this. It just starts to create a clearer picture that's also less inside of you. So you're starting to take all of these things and put them out in front of you a little bit and be able to see what's going on. And with that, piggybacking on that, is looking at the story and the facts. All right, so let's look at that family situation. The facts may be uncomfortable phone call with family member, parents got involved, then I had a conversation with them, mostly felt better, another family member got involved, and now we need to have another conversation. Okay, that might be just what a bigger picture thing is happening. When you look at the story, though, it's well-intentioned family member started to dig their nose into our lives, and now I'm really angry and I feel judged by my parents, and now I need to have 2 more conversations about that. So the story can have a lot more emotion involved in it. But when you can actually look at the story, that's usually where those unmet needs are, right? You can start to dissect, maybe that person was not trying to mess with my life. Maybe my parents aren't judging me. Maybe I'm just overwhelmed because I have these other things going on in addition to this, and I was not ready to deal with a family drama right now. Then you're able to pull the facts and the story kind of together, and you're going to have more information about how to manage those unmet needs, how to feel like, okay. And how to, and Susan and I talk about this all the time, start to set up some boundaries around this. Hey, this has become an emergent thing, but I actually don't have time for this right now. I can deal with that next phone call on Wednesday. And in that time, you're going to have enough time and space to process it with your partner, come up with a plan, ground yourself in, so that when you have that conversation, immediately it's going to be less charged. So when we do these things to identify our real needs, we have a much better chance of really getting clarity from the conflict, diffusing situations, and also making sure that our needs are actually understood by us and then more likely to get met in the external potentially. And the other piece too, which is really just hard to deal with in life as a human being, is that a lot of times other people are not going to meet our needs. And that's just how it is. And if we can at least know what they are and we can do the best we can to claim them, give them to ourselves, things like that, we're going to have a lot better chance at success in relationships and conversation. So the next piece is minimizing our needs. And really all of us tend to be on a spectrum, and it really depends on the relationship as well. A lot of times we'll minimize our needs with some people and overemphasize our needs with other people, but people tend to be on a spectrum. Some people lean into minimizing their own needs, and some people have an overemphasis on getting their needs met. So let's start with minimizing our needs. What does that mean? We can do this for a lot of reasons, and it's basically trying to take the thing that feels very painful, very uncomfortable, very uncertain, and diminish it so that it is less than what we're actually feeling. And a lot of times we do this for a lot of different reasons. We don't want to have too much attention put on it. We don't feel like a belief that there's not enough resources, things like that for us. So it's like, no, it's okay. I'll wait for the next train. I'll get a meal later. I'm okay. So minimizing our needs because we don't want to be the one who's taking up space, be the one who needs something. We think that we don't want to be demanding, rude, needy. We don't want to have needs. So we decide to be like, no, it's fine. I'll stay 3 hours after work and not go home and see my children. It's okay. So we don't want to be the person who has basic needs and sets up boundaries. We want to be accommodating, we want to be kind, we want to be all of these other things. And in doing so, we minimize how we're actually feeling and what we actually need. We don't want to be a bother. What we feel we have to ask for something, it's not a genuine offering from the other person. So a lot of times when we're feeling like we have a need, we feel like maybe the other person doesn't necessarily want to. We've already decided for them that they don't have it to give. And so we just decide that we're not going to ask in the first place. So there's a lot of ways that we just take all of these feelings and kind of jam them down. And of course, the last thing and the biggest one is the fear of rejection, the fear of criticism, judgment, all of those things. Like, I am not going to be approved of. They're going to disagree with me. I'm not going to be taken care of, things like that. So when we're minimizing our needs, we're just taking everything we're feeling, we're shrinking it down. Well, my partner's not going to want to do that. So I just won't even say anything. Or, I mean, she's never going to change. So I'll just leave it. But what's happening in the meantime is we're taking all of these things that we're actually seeing and feeling, and rather than giving them space and an opportunity to actually be dealt with or have a conversation about it, we pretend like it's not a problem in the first place. The biggest piece with minimizing needs is, of course, those needs still exist. And then what ends up happening frequently is they will start to come out in sideways ways, other ways, right? Where we can get into blame, manipulation, control, things like this, because we have been taking all of these feelings and pretending like they're not important, they don't exist, that we don't need anything. And so when we do that, we have needs. And so what happens is these spillings can come out. And like I said, it can come out in another whole area of your life. Maybe things aren't working at home, and so it comes out in this other area. So with that, let's talk about overemphasizing needs. So when our needs were not met as a child, or maybe we were doted on, we were overly doted on as a child, things like that, we can have an overemphasis on our needs. People do this for a lot of different reasons. So a belief that there is not enough attention, resources, jobs. So the inverse of the other one that we were talking about, right? We think other people would speak up if they needed something. So because we have an overemphasis on how we're feeling, what we need, what needs to be taken care of, we automatically assume that other people would have that same kind of energy or drive, and that if they needed something, they would say so. So I'm just going to assume that this person is fine because they haven't said anything, so they must be fine. So now you have, right, these two playing like a lock and key with each other, the one who minimizes their needs and the one who overemphasizes their needs, and you start to have conflict there. So we believe that if we don't take care of ourselves, no one else will. That's a huge one that happens in the overemphasis of needs, is that, well, no one else is going to, X, Y, Z. So I'm just going to make sure that I take care of myself. So this person in a work environment could be like, well, I don't care if they asked us to stay 3 hours late. I need to go home, so I'm going to go home. And I'm not even going to ask anybody. Overemphasis on your own needs, rather than checking in, noticing what's going on in the collective, things like that. So you can see where these two can start to play against each other, either inside of ourselves or in collectives of people or in relationships. And then the last couple feel like we're going to be left out or left behind. So an overemphasis on needs usually means that, well, if I don't just, if I don't stand my ground, if I don't ask for what I want, then everybody else will get it, but I won't. I'm going to be left out. I'm going to be left behind, right? And then the last one is feeling like we deserve our fair share. So feeling like, whether it be time, energy, money, attention, that we feel like, well, but I deserve to be listened to, taken care of, whatever it is. And all of that is true, except for that if there's an overemphasis on what you need, there may be a lack of attention and understanding about who the people around you are and what they need. And so if you get into this place in life and find that you're getting reflections from bosses, partners, family members of like, where they seem a little bit exasperated, you're getting reflections of like, well, that's really selfish, things like that. It's important to really be able to look and be like, oh, am I not really taking in what other people might need? And the other piece that can be tricky with both of these is that a person who minimizes their needs tends to then feel like any need they have is an overemphasis. Likewise, a person who overemphasizes their needs feels like anything that isn't necessarily about them and their needs is a great sacrifice. So we really want to be aware of where we are on that spectrum and what can be going on, because it's easy traps to get into. And most of the time, people are not living at the polarities. They usually tend to move between these places depending on the relationship that they're having and where they're getting their needs met or where they're not getting their needs met. So with that, I will pass it to Susan.
You see how this becomes very challenging in terms of really needing to be honest with oneself and really mindful, because that last part specifically, it's hard to recognize ourselves in these things oftentimes, because especially we are responding to something like Colleen said. If we maybe didn't get our needs met as a child and now we're overcompensating by overemphasizing our needs, we might still be in the story of lack, in the story of I didn't get my needs met, therefore we think we're a minimize needs person, but really we're overcompensating and we've moved into an overemphasizing person. So you see how important it is to get clear on that story, because they all these things start to inform one another. So if it's not obvious by now where all of these needs fit in and why they're important in communication, I want you to think of our I feel when because statement that we've talked about, that most of us have seen at some point in our lives. The way to communicate something in a more neutral way is, when X happens, I feel Y because I need Z. And then we would make our request, you know, would you consider XYZ? But of course, the reality is if we don't know what our needs are, you see how it can become very difficult for us to speak in terms of, when X happens, I feel Y. We can at least maybe get that part if we're in tune with the feelings. But then what? You know, that's where it's helpful to have an understanding of what that underlying need is, because then that, of course, informs what sort of request we're making from the other person or the situation. And without that, we have a limited ability to move forward or progress through the communication or the situation. So what we are going to do for our interactive portion today is, rather than reflection questions, we're going to walk through a few examples, and I'm going to ask you for feedback. And it's not, you won't be sharing anything personal, so I hope you'll just chime in openly in the group here, because basically I'm going to give you different little scenarios, and I'm going to ask what may be one of the underlying emotional triggers, or what do you need, or how do you choose to proceed? And I'm not necessarily talking about you personally, though you're welcome to respond from how you would feel if you were in one of these scenarios, but you're also welcome, and I'm really inviting you to just chime in with various responses to these scenarios, because I think it's also helpful to see how other people might be perceiving what the underlying emotional triggers are, what the needs are, or how we choose to proceed, and recognizing that there isn't one right way oftentimes, which is why we have to be careful, of course, with the assumptions and projections. But it gets us really practiced in starting to look for these kinds of things in the situation. All right, so get ready to chime in here. So here's our first example. Okay, hold on. You're at the end of an exhausting workday, and your kids have toys spread across the living room and the dining room. You're about to lose your temper because you asked them to have everything picked up by the time you got done. So in this scenario, you know, again, you're at the end of your exhausting workday, toys are everywhere, living room, dining room, maybe, you know, you're in your home office, you come out, stuff everywhere, you're about to lose it. And it's not just because the toys are everywhere, but because you specifically requested that everything get picked up. So I'm asking you, what's maybe one of the underlying emotional triggers here? Like, what's the, you know, what's potentially the thing that's pissing you off about the situation? All right, so chime in our chat box. What have you got to say? I'm opening it up. Yep. Not feeling heard, not feeling respected, exactly. Lack of control, good, yeah, not being heard. Yep. Love it, good. So what do you need in this moment? What is it that you actually need? And again, there's not a right answer. Yeah, space to decompress, a little bit of space, remain calm, decompress, a cookie and a hug, exactly, right? Love it. Yeah, so how do you choose to proceed in that moment? And this might be anything. You might share like how, you know, what you choose to say to the kids, or how you choose to address the situation, or what. And you can always give me like your best attempt of what you want to choose to proceed, but you can also give me what you think you would do. Okay, so so good. All right. Yeah, take a 10-minute break. On a good day, take a breath and do my best to be fair. Calm communication, wait until feeling better to discuss and then address expectation. Let time pass and come back to it after dinner and ask the same thing. Get out the chocolate chips when all else fails. What I would really do, passive aggressive response. Yeah, thanks for that honesty, right? So the thing in these situations is, of course, is there an ideal? The ideal, of course, is to address what those needs or those emotional triggers are through some kind of communication, in this case with your children. Like, hold on here, yeah. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're not just letting the situation kind of pass without being acknowledged in some way, because what ends up happening is, of course, the next time that happens, now you're even angrier, right? Because you still don't feel respected, you still don't feel heard. Maybe you felt better in that moment because you took yourself on a timeout, or you had the hug, or you got the cookie, or whatever it might be, but you didn't necessarily readdress the situation. So when we start to at least recognize in the moment the underlying emotional trigger, we can go, okay, yeah, I didn't feel heard. So ideally, we might want to communicate that to somebody. So let's go back to our when X I feel because I need situation. So I'm just going to give you an example of a couple of these when this happens. When you talk to me in that tone, I feel like you're scolding me because I need a little bit more gentleness. Would you consider softening your tone a bit? So, that would be something where I've literally had this conversation with a friend before, where a friend has said to me that a friend that's quite sensitive to tone asked me to soften my tone. I could choose to be triggered by that and be like, what are you talking about? Well, I'm not scolding you, whatever that is, right? And we're allowed to say something in response, but you start to be open to hearing people's needs, and you go, okay, well, if I really value this conversation, I will soften my tone. Another example, when you stare off when I'm talking to you, I feel like you don't think what I'm saying is important because I need a little more engagement. Would you give me a little more eye contact? Now, in this scenario, somebody could turn back and say, it's actually when I stare off, it's actually that I'm trying to focus on what you're saying. So it's difficult for me to maintain eye contact when I'm listening, and I need to actually look away when I'm listening to you. But please know that that's not because I'm tuning out. But you see how that starts to open a dialogue. So with all of that in mind, what might you say to your children in this moment with your I feel because? It doesn't need to follow that, formula exactly, of course, but anybody have examples of what they might say to the kiddos? As the age is changing, absolutely, right? You have to make it age appropriate. But I think a lot of times, one of the things that happens is we perceive that our children don't have the emotional capacity to hear these things. Yeah. Ask them why they chose not to pick up toys, knowing past agreement. Good. Yep. Get information from them. I agree, Dad. I have a 20-year-old here, and it's very different. Yeah. Yeah, I find that in general that we misestimate their capacity for it. I think because we weren't taught, right? We weren't taught these skills. So oftentimes we think, well, they're not up for it, when I think sometimes they are actually far more up for it than we are up for it as adults. All right. Anybody want to throw in another thing that you might say to the kids? Yeah. It's so true. They do change so fast. Yeah, and these conversations do tend to be very fluid. All right, so let's take another scenario. Your partner invited some friends over to dinner. Let's assume it's outside on a warmer day and didn't ask you about it first. You're feeling really frustrated. So what might be one of the underlying emotional triggers there? Again, your partner invited some friends over, didn't check in with you. Okay, yep, they're not respecting you. What else? Not feeling included in the decision. Okay, so again, maybe a sense of inclusion, feeling invisible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no respect for my space, needs after work. Yep, maybe overriding some kind of need. Boundaries. Good. And again, remember, I'm asking you this because it starts to get you in the habit of practicing what's actually happening for you in these moments. So what do you need? What do you think you need there in that situation? Assuming you're feeling one of these things, you're feeling invisible, you're feeling not included in the decision, maybe you're feeling like a lack of respect, better communication. Mm-hmm. I think probably most of these can be answered with better communication, right? Yeah. Need permission to not participate. Oh, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, a little bit of a boundary in there. And by no means am I saying that better communication in and of itself isn't what the need is, right? Because I think in general, it is the need. It's like, I need you to talk to me about these kinds of things before you make the decision on your own. You know, I need to be involved in some of these, or I need to know that like I believe it was Joy that mentioned, you know, a boundary of, then if you do make a decision like this, then I need you to know in the future, or even in this moment, that I might not participate. Here, what can I do to make me feel better? Oh, that you might need to hear, what can you do to make you feel better? Mm-hmm. So how do you choose to proceed in that situation? Some of your needs kind of even dictate it, right? It might be like establishing a boundary, or what else? Like how do you choose to, what do you say to that partner? And feel free, you know, that the person who was saying, yeah, I know that I would probably be a little passive aggressive, and we're going to talk about some of those communication styles next week. But, you know, you might recognize again, well, what would you say to that? Anybody want to chime in? How do you choose to proceed? Yeah, great. When you don't include me in decisions that impact both of us, I feel left out. Could you keep me in the loop? Right. So in that, you're sharing what it leaves, when this, then I feel this, and you're making your request, right, to be kept into the loop. It's also, you're expressing a boundary. Yeah, ask for them not to do it again. Okay, right, that's a possibility, right? You're making a request that they not do it. That's what I hear in that one, is an expression of a boundary. You're actually saying, like, I would like you to not do that. And what I'm curious about in that example, would that be a sense of saying that that's your boundary. I'm asking you not to do that, to not include, you know, to not include me. In other words, that's what it sounds like you're requesting there, is some kind of boundary. Be honest to what exactly you're feeling. Communicate feelings and then ask more about why they decided to do that, then decide for yourself whether or not to participate. Okay. I would also not make assumptions about their motive to not include me. Nice. Yes. Be honest of what your feelings are is what I meant. Yeah. Good. Yep. Yeah. Boundary. I'm assuming that's what you were about to type with that B. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So what I think is really interesting here is we're seeing some different kind of communication styles emerge here, right? So, so what I see in a consistent thing I see in your responses, Joy, is asking of them, for example, their motivation. So I think that that's an interesting approach in communication as well, is to try to get more information. That helps us, of course, with the not making assumptions. Like, you know, Ellen, you mentioned not making assumptions about their motive to not include you. For all you know, they were actually trying to respect, like, well, remember you said that you wanted, you know, Ted and Phil to come over sometime, and you actually told me, just, I don't know, I'm overwhelmed, just figure it out yourself. And then we go, oh, shoot, yeah, I did tell you that. You know, and then we have to like own that, right? So so by not just getting mad first, by asking the, like, well, why did you do that? You know, I don't like that. It gives them that space maybe to say, I know you don't like that, but you actually told me to just go ahead with that. I think you were overwhelmed and just said, fine, whatever. All right, you know, so then we're receiving the other end of things. All right, let's do one more of these, and then I'm just going to open it up for general questions. Let's see. You just saw a photo on Facebook because some of your good friends gathered safely and outside, of course, in our COVID times, and you were not invited. So you feel sad. What may be one of the underlying emotional triggers? Seems kind of obvious, some of these, right? When we're like dissecting them like this, but it's not always obvious in the moment. I am way too addicted to Facebook, right? And then you start to be like, oh, they're doing that thing. I wasn't invited to that thing. Yep, belonging, not feeling included, triggering that belonging core story, exactly. Yep. Belonging seems the most obvious one. Yeah, what did I say last time we were together? Maybe it starts to be like a questioning back. Oh my God, you know, did I say something? Did I offend them? You know, in fact, I'm going to share with you a story of something that happened to me with this very situation. I did see a photo once of do they not like me? Exactly, like a questioning, so maybe a worth thing. I did see a photo once of some friends gathered, and I asked that friend, I actually asked her, I said, oh, I saw you had some friends over, and, you know, I felt kind of sad to not be included. And she actually said to me, oh, I mean, I definitely would have included you, but I know that you've said that sometimes you get really overwhelmed in larger groups and you prefer, like, you know, one-on-one time, or versus like being at a, you know, social engagement. And again, by just sharing, like Colleen was saying earlier, like being honest with myself, it triggered that belonging. I felt safe enough to share with the friends. It gave them the opportunity to say that I was actually basing it on this other information you gave me. So they were trying to be very compassionate. So then what happened was I was able to say, oh, that was really kind of you. And just so you know, because this was a friend where I was kind of developing a deeper friendship with them, I said, just so you know, I always love the option. So feel free to, if it feels, you know, aligned for you, feel free to always invite me. And then I would like to be able to have the option of saying no, you know, assuming it's not an inconvenience to her to just have me, you know, if I'm like, say no every time, I could see maybe she wouldn't want to invite me. But, you know, it starts to establish a, like, what is my need? Well, my need is to be included. Well, my need is to be asked. You follow what I'm saying? So again, we start to have that dialogue based on that. So, so I kind of gave you an example there of how you might choose to proceed. Of course, you might have chose something else completely different and just been like, well, forget them. I'm not, I'm not including them anymore or whatever. And again, maybe that's a more aggressive or passive aggressive response to it. But you start to, even as we dissect this a little bit, you start to maybe go, ooh, well, I know what I would have responded to that scenario. And now that we're talking about it, I feel like maybe there might be a healthier way to respond to that scenario. Great. Don't judge yourself. It's really not about being like, ooh, I've been, reacting to these situations poorly or whatever. We react to these situations the way that we feel, the way that we've been conditioned to react. So that, again, the stories, the traumas, the communication styles, which, as I mentioned, we'll talk about next week, but those communication styles are often from our family of origin. If we came from an aggressive family or a passive aggressive family, chances are we're still communicating from that style unless we have changed that consciously. All right, so let's just open it up here for our last 5 or so minutes of any questions about any of this stuff, and then I'm going to give you another little fun thing. Colleen, anything to add about any of that?
Yeah, screw those people who didn't invite you over.
Right, you didn't want to go to their thing anyway.
Yeah.
So what kind of questions do we have? What's coming up for you as we talk about this stuff? Is what's coming up like, okay, I feel like I do take into account needs, or wow, I realize that I probably have a lot of unmet needs in these situations, or, if I think about that last, argument I was in with so-and-so, I'm aware that there were some needs there. Yeah, when I can check myself and take a breath, all seems to be okay. I mean, isn't that often what it comes down to, is being able to take that pause, to take that moment? And I don't think I've mentioned this, get out of your own head. I don't think I've mentioned this resource yet, but I love the very simple little book, The 4 Agreements. And one of the main tenets in the 4 Agreements is don't take things personally. So I believe it was Ellen that mentioned like a reminder that that maybe my partner didn't do that intentionally. I mean, it's one of the best things we can always be keeping in mind is whatever is happening, there's the possibility. Yeah, I know, I love that book. Are people who are independent? Not necessarily. People who are independent, are they usually overemphasizing needs? Not necessarily. I don't think independence means you're inherently overemphasizing your needs. Is there something that leaves you either concerned or feeling like that might be the case? Or I'm curious.
Yeah, I think a lot of times actually independent people can minimize their needs because they're so used to taking care of themselves that it's like, I got it, I'll handle it. So again, we're all just moving in this spectrum. Um,
Yeah, what else? How are we feeling? Are we starting to see the connection points between the core stories, the trauma responses, how that starts to influence the getting clearer on the needs so that we can communicate them better, and also maybe potentially recognize what need isn't being met in another person so that at least we can maybe ask the questions, inquire. How are you feeling? Great.
Good.
Yeah, so one of the things I mentioned in Mighty Networks this past week, and for those of you who aren't in there, don't worry, I mean, you didn't miss anything other than I invited people there. I did share a couple of great articles, so if you have a chance, you can still join us there. All the posts are still in there. And something I invited you all to do is to start just paying attention more to start paying more attention. Sorry, I'm reading at the same time. Start paying more attention to the way that communications are going down around you. You know, I mentioned an example in the platform there about that. I had a situation the other day where I talked to two different people with a similar organization. So it was, you know, the contrast was evident because they were both the same kind of organization. And it felt like in one, the communication was very, very clear. I found myself not having a lot of questions to how they were communicating. And in the other situation, I found myself like feeling like I was missing a lot of pieces, and recognizing that I was consistent in the situation. You know, it was like 20 minutes between the two conversations. So it was clear to me that it was the style in which the person was communicating. It kind of felt like they're used to talking to people all the time and maybe like leave out important things because they say the same things to customers, clients, whatever, throughout the day. And so maybe they're not being as detailed as they could be. You know, so you just start to notice these little things when you start observing more. Okay, so Joy, you're saying, I don't know too many people that talk in this way, so I'm thinking about that. Yeah, you mean that talk in the way of like being this maybe open and honest and forward about feelings or needs. I'm assuming you mean that potentially, or maybe you mean something. Yeah. Well, and wouldn't it be an easier world if we all did? You know, but I will tell you what. People model what they hear and see. You know, we're very, you know, we've got these mirror neurons and all of this cool stuff that's happening in the brain, especially in our families of origin. So those of us, you know, with children or whatever, if they start to see us speaking in a certain way, they will begin to model this. And just to tell you that this stuff can be taught, because my daughter is actually my stepdaughter. So from a genetic standpoint, her communication style is not my communication style. She had a lot of conditioning that was not the types of things that I teach. And yet at the same time, I've watched her communication evolve, especially in recent years between the ages of 16 and 20, in a way that shows me and proves to me, of course, that we are able to shift this. These are skills that we can learn. My own communication style has changed so much in recent years, but it took being really honest with myself in the first place in this way that we've been encouraging. You know, I come from a family that has a much more aggressive communication style. So for me, I really did learn how to soften, you know, and other people, it's almost like they need to learn how to, you know, harden a little bit, or get a little, get clearer, ask for what they really want instead of the sideways, more passive aggressive, you know, thing that we often see more of in the Midwest. You know, it's to the point where a lot of people, when I was growing up, assumed I was from the East Coast because my communication style is much more direct, you know. So there's all these ways in which things are dictated by that. All right, so we don't want to keep you here as much as we would love to just spend the afternoon with you. I know you have other things to do. So a little homework assignment. Are any of you familiar with the Enneagram? The Enneagram is like a personality assessment, but it's a very particular kind of personality assessment. And it's yeah, good. And it can be helpful, just like in the same way that like Myers-Briggs. Oh, awesome, your sister's an Enneagram coach. That's fabulous. So you definitely know what your Enneagram type is, I bet, by now, and probably what your sister's is as well. And I'm curious, do you feel that knowing the Enneagram, especially like your own type, and don't worry, I'll explain it in a moment, and your sister's type, like, does that help your communication or, you know, inform your communication? So for those not familiar, you don't have to be. It's literally, it's kind of like like I said, like a Myers-Briggs or any other kind of personality assessment that has different archetypes. In this case, there's 9 different archetypes. So you get assigned a number from 1 through 9. It also has different names depending on, you know, the test you take. So I'm going to pop in the chat box here I'm going to pop a link to one you can take for free. I'll put it in the Mighty Networks as well. Hold on, I'm looking for my link, and I'll type it in there for you. I admit that this test is, the format on their website is a little like kind of like an old looking website, so it's a little clunky, but it seemed to be a pretty accurate quiz when I took it, and I think it's like 40 questions or something like that. Hold on, I'm looking for it and I don't know where my link went. If all else fails, you literally need to just Google free Enneagram quiz, but let me see where it went.
Seeing if I can find it.
Strangely, I feel like I might have like deleted it or something strange.
You did, because it was in.
It was in my little notes here. So let me pull it up because I still have it here on my. As I said, it's a very old school looking website, but here you go. It's called Eclectic energies.com/Enneagram. So you can, let's make sure I don't have any typos in here. Enneagram/test. So you can just click on that and copy and paste it into your browser, and you should be able to go right to their little page there. And it says right in their classical Enneagram test with instinctual variant. You just want that classical Enneagram test. As I said, it's just a free little test you can take. And once it tells you what some of the free tests online make you sign up for their list. That's why I chose this one, because it just tells you what your number is. And then you can take your number and you can look it up anywhere. Like you can, like I'm a 6, I'm the loyalist, so then I can look up Enneagram loyalist or Enneagram 6, and I can read to my heart's content all about my archetype, and I just find it really, as I said, another thing that kind of just adds to the mix of like some personal insights, and you start to like recognize that, oh, I'm probably communicating with this kind of Myers-Briggs type, or this kind of Enneagram type, or this kind of, and with that in mind, not that you're necessarily going to like modify how you communicate, but you might, and you might just take it in. Like, I know, knowing what my sister is, for example, knowing what my husband is, I'm aware of what's happening underneath the surface, because I know those types. So it's just kind of a fun way to give us a little bit more insight. So we thought that would be a fun little homework assignment for you. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. What'd you say, Colleen?
I just said it's so helpful and we'll talk about it more next week, but just when you can start to see what's motivating yourself and other people, you really start to get a lot of insight into like, oh, that's what's going on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's looking like things are clicking together and making sense. I hope that you're getting value out of this. And we shall see you again. Oh, well, actually, we won't see you again next week, right? We have that week off. So we will see you in 2 weeks. So make sure that, you're sticking around in Mighty Networks, or join us in there if you haven't yet. And we'll keep giving you some supplemental information as well. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everybody.